let's all go over here. These two sections. There's plenty of room for everybody in these two sections. I don't have to look like way over there. He's going around. Okay, do I sound okay? Thank you for the thumbs up. All righty. We are going to get started as it is just about that time. 5:54. We're a little late. That's okay. So, how is everybody? You guys seem very quiet, like sedate, like you're all worn out and tired. Is school just sucking the life out of you all? Oh, that's not good. That's not good. You got to be excited. Maybe I feel better. I just took a little nap. Maybe that's it. But we're going to get started because we have lots of fun stuff, exciting stuff to talk about tonight. No? All right. We're going to go ahead and start with our opening prayer. So if you could all join me in a prayerful posture, whatever that looks like for you, we'll go ahead and begin. The Lord be with you. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the blessings that you give us as your people. We are thankful in general as we get close to this Thanksgiving season. And while it may not look like it normally does, or we may not be able to do the things that we would traditionally do, we look back at this past year and give you thanks. For you are a great and wonderful, caring God, one who delivers your people over and over and over again. We thank you for your commitment to us as your people, and we hope to live into that commitment, that relationship, that covenant with you in all things that we do. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. Okay, so we have some announcement type things to go over. And then the important one that I forgot to completely put up there is no confirmation next week. As next week is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and so we don't have confirmation next Wednesday. We will resume the week after that, but next week we do not have confirmation. So, next, stuff you should know. We, because I have 4 volunteers, high school volunteers, who have set up a TikTok account, and we will be putting stuff out. And so, what was the name of that again, Caitlin? Transitions Youth Group. So if you look at Transitions Youth Group on TikTok, if you're on TikTok, you will find stuff posted there. Also, we've started a group me so that if you have a cell phone and you have your own phone number and you would like to get texts or about upcoming events and different things, feel free to reach out to any of the young people, namely Maddie Wolf. I'm drawing a blank. Cassidy Henry, Caitlin Ryberg, and who was our 4th? Taylor Reeder. So we'll do that. We'll have stuff going out on a regular basis and doing that. So for going forward on youth events and things like that, we'll have an opportunity for you to do that if you want. If for nothing else, just let me know, and we'll get you connected to that so that you can get text and update about youth group events and all that. It's for high school and middle school. And last but not least, this Sunday, during the youth group time, so right after the 10 o'clock worship service on Sunday, we're going to have an informational meeting about the summer trips this summer, primarily about the Boundary Waters trip that we're planning for 2021. It's a great weekend. If nothing else, the week when we get back, I will show you some videos and some pictures of our last trip. It's just a great week of canoeing and camping and eating outside and swimming and just goofing around in God's beautiful world. It's a great trip. I've gone, I think, 5 times before. It is my favorite place in the entire world to go, and it's just beautiful. And sometimes you even get to see a moose. What was that, Chris? Even Florida. It is more, I would rather go there than Disney World. It's just fun. It's amazing. It's wonderful. So that is coming up this Sunday. So if you would like to join us, we've sent information out. You can either come in person, like we normally do, or you can also join us online because we will have a go-to meeting going where we'll have that information streamed on there. So that is coming up Sunday. So what have we learned so far? We've been talking about the 10 Commandments and the history leading up to that. What are some things you could do? And Brendan, your hand shot up like way even before I started. So what do you got for us? You shall have no other gods before me. Exactly. That's the first thing that God directs us to do. Brandon. Don't kill people. That's what we talked about last week, right? We talked about the 5th commandment, you shall not kill. Mr. Langford. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, right? God took his people who had been living in slavery for hundreds of years and said, okay, you need a day of rest. And even today, we need a day of rest, a day to remember, to revitalize ourselves, and to rejoice in what God has done for us. What else? Yes. Honor your mother and father, the 4th commandment, right? It's the only commandment that has a promise attached to it. That if you do this, if you honor your mother and father, you will live so that you can live well in the land that the Lord is going to provide for us. Exactly. Anything else? Chris Henry. Do not use the Lord's name in vain, right? Which name? All of them? Yes. All of them. Okay. Even what? Even Yahweh, which isn't one we normally use, but you should use all of them with respect and only use them when we're praying to God or praising God or reaching out to God, not when we're doing all the things that we probably shouldn't be talking about God with. So, okay. Good deal. So that leads us to the today. Today we're going to talk about the 6th commandment, which is probably the commandment that is always the weirdest and most awkward to talk to with about a bunch of middle school students. So we're going to try to make it as least awkward as possible. We're going to talk about adultery and what that is. And most of you are like, that is not a word I would normally use. That is not something I normally talk about. It may not even be something you even have ever thought about, but we're going to talk about it because apparently it was so important to God that he made a commandment about this. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to do our session in here, and then we're going to have an opportunity to break up into 2 groups, guys in one group, girls in one group, and that way if you have questions or things that you don't want to necessarily ask in front of me because, so Lewis and I are going to take the guys, and Kara and Alyssa and the other high school girls are going to take the girls and give you an opportunity to talk about the things that we talk about here that you might not want to share or talk about in the large group. So the 6th commandment is, you shall not commit adultery. You're like, what is adultery? You keep using this word, Chad. What does it mean? We'll get to that. This is what Martin Luther says this means. In the Small Catechism, he writes, we are to fear and love God so that we lead pure and decent lives in word and deed, and each of us loves and honors his or her spouse. Okay? Live pure and decent lives in the things that we say, in the things that we do, and that each of us honors and loves our spouses. How many of you have a spouse? I do. Yes, none of you are married right now. How many of you eventually think you want to be married? Probably. Statistically, most of you in this room will be married at some point in your life. You will find that special someone and you will get married. So it's an important relationship. It is one of the most important relationships in our lives. It's the person you took. When you get married, typically, if you get married in the church, you go before your friends and your family and God, and you say, this is the person I want to be with forever. It's not like you go in and nobody ever in their wedding said, I want to be married for this person until they get ugly, or until they get sick, or if they get poor. We specifically say, even despite those things, we want to be in a relationship with them. So it's a pretty important relationship. If you're trying to commit to your relationship with somebody else for the rest of your life, that's a long time. That's a lot of putting up with the things that are not necessarily good about us. I can tell you there are things about me, and I know this will shock you all, that drive my wife crazy. There was my daughter. Yes, it is a shocker. But she still loves me. After 20-some-odd years, we're still married. We still love each other. Do we always like each other? But we always love each other. We're committed to staying together and being together and doing the things that a husband and wife, two spouses, do. So, we're going to talk about two stories. So if you pull out your Bibles and your notebooks, if you want to take notes, we're going to talk about two stories in the Bible that deal with adultery. And typically when we talk about adultery, this means doing something in the relationship that breaks down that relationship between you and your spouse, right? Whether that's cheating on it or having sexual relations with somebody who's not your spouse, right? So we have two stories. There's a lot more stories in the Bible than this, but we're going to talk about two of them. And the first one comes from the Gospel of John, which is located in the New Testament. It's the fourth Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Chapter 7, verses 53, so it's the tail end of that chapter, goes into chapter 8. Chapter 7, verse 53 is where it starts. And so you have this story where Jesus is teaching some people like he always did. And he's there, and a bunch of these people in the church, they bring this lady. What's up, Chris? It starts in chapter 7 and goes to chapter 8. It is. It could be, some Bibles have different, but you're there, right? Okay. So, well, read the verse before it. What does the verse before it say? In 53 of that. Or there are only 52, are you saying, in the previous one? Okay. Because it's the story, they group those verses together. Okay? So, they have this story, and Jesus is there talking with the people, and they bring forth this woman, and they say, we caught this woman cheating on her husband. Now, here's a question for you. How many people does it take to cheat in a relationship? Two. She had to be cheating with somebody else, right, to cheat on her husband? No. No. She can't cheat by herself with somebody else, right? So there had to have been some other man that she was cheating, who, even if he wasn't intentionally doing it, she was having a relationship with some other person, right? Did they bring the man forward? No. They just bring forward this woman, right? Yes. What if it was a forced marriage? That's getting into something it wasn't, because they didn't live in a society where they were forced marriages. Some of them had been married younger than probably. Actually, back then, some people in this age group, in this area, in this room, would have been getting married. I'm just saying. You were like 14 or 15 or 16, you were probably going to get married. Which just seems really odd to us, especially nowadays. But that's how it was, right? So they bring forth this woman, and she says, this woman was cheating on her husband. What do you think we should do? What does the law say that we should do? And Jesus looks at them and says, you're all waiting very patiently. She looks at him and says, let the person among you who has not sinned, throw the first stone. Because that was the punishment. If you were caught in adultery, both a man and a woman, the penalty was death in the time of Jesus. Numerous places in the Bible it says, if a man and a woman are commit adultery, they should be put to death. And so that's what Jesus is basically saying. He's saying, like, if you're saying this woman's guilty and you're following the law because that's what the law says we should do. They were trying to trick him. Because Jesus was one of these guys that says we should love everybody, right? We should care for everybody. There's no story in the Bible where Jesus says we should kill them, right? And so he says, this is what the law says. The law says we should kill them. But he looks at them and he says, so the person in this room, this person in this group who has not sinned, you be the first person to throw the stone. And slowly, the old folks leave. And then the other people leave. And eventually, everybody leaves. And the only person that's standing there is this woman. And it says that Jesus is basically, while he's sitting there writing on the ground. It's kind of the strangest thing. As he's talking to these religious leaders, he's down on the ground writing in the dust. I'd love to know what he was writing. Was he just doodling, like drawing stick figures, or was he like writing something prophetic? But it just says he was writing. And he looks up, and everybody's gone. And he looks at the woman, and he says, I don't have any contempt for you. I'm not going to punish you. And if there was anybody to punish her, it would be Jesus, right? He's not sinned. He's the one without sin. He'd be completely in his right to punish her. And he looks at her and he says, go and sin no more. And she goes. That's the story of adultery. So part of that's just to set the stage. This is how serious it was in the Jewish faith. That relationship between a man and woman was so necessary and so important that if somebody broke that relationship, that was grounds for death. That seems a little outrageous today, right? But, yes, Brendan. The punishment was to stone them to death. They would literally put them down there, and people would pick up stones, and they would throw them at them over and over and over again until they killed them. That was the typical way somebody would. So that one person was responsible for killing them. The group was, right? Does that make sense? And so they would literally pick up stones and throw them at people to kill them. One of the first people that died as a Christian, his name was Stephen, and that's how he died, which is pretty amazing in itself because we've talked about St. Paul here, right? The guy who wrote most of the New Testament. it talks about how he stands there and holds everybody else's robes while they stone Stephen to death. One of the first Christians, the first Christian to die for his faith. So, that's what stoning is. Not very fun, right? So that's the first story. Second story comes from 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. We have the story of King David. And we've talked about David before, right? We talked about David last week with David and Goliath, right? David goes and he kills Goliath, and he eventually becomes king of all Israel. So he's like the head honcho. And it talks about how at the beginning of this, in 2 Samuel, David is standing outside. Oh, so he's standing out on the palace, looking out, and he looks down and he sees this woman bathing. So she's naked. And he goes, that woman is beautiful. She's amazing. I think I'm in love with this beautiful woman. And he sends her a note and he invites her, and she comes to him. And they have sex. Because she goes, hey, he's the king. He's kind of a good guy. Now here's the bad part. Bathsheba is her name, and she's married. And not only is she married, she's married to one of the generals, one of the people who is in King David's army. His name is Uriah. Now David knows this, but he still sleeps with Bathsheba. And he's looking, and he's like, oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? So Uriah, who's out fighting the wars for King David, one of King David's friends, he comes back. And he's like, hey, this is what's going on in the war, and blah, blah, blah. And David, feeling guilty for what he did, said, hey, you should go home and see your wife. Go take care of your wife. And Uriah's like, no, my soldiers are out in the field fighting, so I'm just going to stay here and sleep and rest, and then I'm going back. And David's like, wow, this guy's really committed to me as one of my soldiers, and I just slept with his wife. So what does he do? He goes to the general of the army and says, hey, I want you to send Uriah, next time you have a battle, I want you to send him to the center of the battle where it's most fierce, and when he gets there, I want you to leave him. What's going to happen if he's in the middle of the battle fighting and all the soldiers leave? He's going to get killed, right? David's like, well, this is a solution to my problem, because if we kill Uriah, then his wife is free to marry somebody else, and she can marry me. Well, also the problem comes up because they slept together, Bathsheba is going to have a baby. It's very complicated. But it happens. They send Uriah out. They go to the battlefield. He's out in the middle of this battle. And all of a sudden, the troops drop back and Uriah is killed. All of this stems from the story of David looking out over his balcony and seeing this beautiful woman and not knowing that she's married, knowing who she's married to, but still goes out and does what he thinks he wants to do. He feels like he wants to do, even though he knew it was wrong. This is what it does. And it happens. It happens. And I know most of you probably can't relate to this. I can, because you may not be interested in girls, or you may not be interested in guys. You may not be interested in having a relationship with somebody because it's not where you are right now. But at some point in time, I guarantee you, for at least 99% of you, you're going to look around and you're going to find somebody who you're attracted to, who you have a connection with, and you're going to pursue that. I remember those days. It was called high school. It was odd. It was awkward. Walking through the halls. I mean, I hear it from my daughter now. There are people walk through the halls, even in the middle of COVID, and people are making out in the hallways, right? How many of you have seen that at school? No, none of you? Oh, you're homeschooled. But it happens because that's how we're built. A couple more Bible stories, a couple things that the Bible says. This is like a fraction. These are just like 4 of them I picked out of what else the Bible says. If a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. That's in Leviticus. In Matthew it says, "But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent," that means looking at her in a way that puts her into seeing her just as an object of sex, something that he, like, lust. He just like, I really want to be with her. And he has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Jesus said that. Saying if you look at somebody and you're lustful after her, you basically committed adultery. That's a little harsh. In Corinthians, Paul writes, "Flee from sexual immorality," doing things that are wrong sexually. "For every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body." And you're kind of like, what does that mean? We're going to talk about that. Because it's very easy. Like if I go over here and I punch Mariana, right? It hurts her physically, right? When we do something that deals with the relationships that we feel with sex, it's different because there's an emotional connection. We are affected emotionally. Even when people say that the things that happen within sexual relationships doesn't really matter, which you might see stuff on TV, oh, it doesn't matter, it's okay. You might even hear friends say that, oh, it doesn't matter if I sleep with my boyfriend or whatever. It's just sex. They're lying. It's an important thing. It's a gift that God gives us, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Do you remember when we talked about Abraham, right? And there were these 2 towns, Sodom and Gomorrah, where he was like pleading for the people there, like, don't, God, if there's a good person in this town, don't destroy this town, right? And God couldn't find any good people in there, and so he basically wiped those towns off the face of the earth. In the book of Jude, it says, "Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desires, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire." In those 2 towns, they did all kinds of really, and you're going to hear that, you're going to be like, that's gross. There were times where people would have sex in church as a way to worship their gods. Now, how many of you think that we should adopt that as a way of worshiping God? No. Really awkward, really odd. Gross. Right? But they would do other things. They would have relationships with there's a place in the Bible that talks about people having sex with their parents, with other people, just random people, prostitution, all kinds of things. You're looking at this and you're like, this is gross, Chad. Yes, this is what people would do back then. And God said, no, that's not what I intended for you. Don't do it. So what is the big deal? It's just sex, right? And most of you are like, I don't even know why I want to talk about this. We have to talk about it. Why? Because it's one of the commandments. And there's an important reason for that. Because God gave us a gift. Uh-oh. We're going to have to fix that. Apparently it died. Just hit present. Oh. So, why is it a big deal? Not reason number one, it is a big deal. Marriage is a big deal. That's the first reason why this commandment is a big deal. Marriage is a big deal. God creates the world, right? In what book does God create the world? What book of the Bible do we get the story of God creating the world? Genesis, right? He creates the world, he creates man, and he looks down, and the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man I have created be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner." So God, seeing man alone there, he's got everything he needs, right? He's got all the plants, he's got all the animals, he should be happy, and he realizes that he's not. And so he makes woman to be the helper, the person to walk alongside Jesus. Alongside man. And he puts them together, and we have man and woman. And you're like, okay, what does that mean? What kind of relationship? Does that mean like women are just there to help men? They use that word, right? No. Because that word means different things in different places. The word in Hebrew for helper is azer. Azer. Can everybody say azer? Azer. The noun azer is used 21 different times in the Old Testament. The first time is here when God says, "I'm going to send man a helper because he needs to be with somebody else." So 21 times he uses this. 3 times it's used to talk about people helping or failing to help in life-threatening situations. Life-threatening situations are pretty important, aren't they? So being a person who helps in a situation that is very, very important. 16 times it's used in reference to God as a helper. When God looks down, he says, "I need to send man, somebody who can be with him to provide him that kind of help that I provide." Man and woman, spouses together. It's a relationship where God's saying, "This is so important to me. I want people to have somebody in their life who can be the help that I cannot provide when they need it." That's how important relationships are. Okay? This relationship we talk about in marriage. And I'm not going to get into the semantics, whether it's man and man, woman and woman, man and woman. That's a whole different discussion. Okay? I'm talking about relationships between a spouse, wherever that looks like. God puts us in those relationships and gives us those people to be that help that we need throughout our lives. It's very important. From the very beginning, he says, "I want people to live in these type of relationships." And the first thing we do very on in the Bible is we start doing things inappropriately with this. Number 2, sex is a big deal. If marriage is a big deal, and the purpose of marriage, it says, is for us to live together and help each other and to produce more people. Okay? Lewis just had a baby, right? Most of you, all of you in this room are the production of people having sex. Okay? Oh, gross. It is a natural thing that has happened millions and billions of times, right? There are billions and billions of people in the world. All of them come from 2 people loving and caring for each other. Right? God intended for this relationship to be there to have sex, and then to be there to help each other through this. It is a big deal. Now we're going to get into some statistics about this that are going to make you kind of open your eyes. It's intended for two people to be with each other, to help each other. How many of you feel that you, at this current juncture in your life, have it all together enough where you could have a relationship where you could fully support another person and take care of a young person if you should happen to have one come along in your life? I do, but I'm an adult. We don't, right? None of you feel that way. 40% of all high school students recently surveyed in this survey have had sex. Do you think many of those are ready and willing to have children? No. But they do it. You probably know of or have heard of people in your schools, even as middle schoolers. This number, surprisingly, is actually down. When I graduated school in 1991, yes, I am that old, the rate of high school students that had sex sometime in high school was 54%. Over half. And it's gone down. So I would say that's a good thing. 40%, probably still really, really high. Yes? Yeah, every other person, yeah. That's a good way to approximate it, yes. At some point. Maybe it was once, maybe it was more. We don't know, but this is the stats that they have. God intends sex to be between two people who are committed to each other. Sex isn't bad, okay? It's not something we should be ashamed about. It's a natural thing that God created us to do. We can't have babies. I mean, I guess technically there are ways around it now through technology. But back then, when God first created us, right, you had to have sex to have babies. They don't just miraculously come on a stork. Okay? So we have this. We have this gift from God. This thing that He enables us to have relationships to do this. It's a good thing. It was never intended to be harmful or disrespectful or just something to be used. God doesn't give us gifts just to casually use and throw away. There is not a single, this is me talking to you. Because statistically, by that, it is very likely that you may have sex outside of marriage before you get married. Okay? Statistically, that's what we hear. Okay? By the time maybe even you're out of college, you're 20-something, it's very likely you may have met somebody you love and care for deeply, and you're like, oh, I'm going to be with this person forever, and you may or you may not. I'm not going to sit here and say, you're wrong. I'm just saying, it may happen. But God intended for this to be something special. I have never, ever, ever, ever had a conversation with an older person or a teenager or somebody who looked back at their life and said, you know what? I really wish I hadn't just saved myself to have just relationships with my spouse. Never heard that. I've had way more people tell me, I regret that I gave myself casually in sex to other people. That I didn't revere it for what God intended, okay? I know that sounds strange to you right now, but I'm just saying those words so hopefully they lodge somewhere in your brain that as you reflect and as you grow up, you realize that this is important. Because the things you do with your body, the things you do with your emotions are important. They are very, very, very important. And that's what God gives us. It's the great thing about sex. It's also the really hard thing about it. Because no matter how much you think, oh, it's just this physical thing I do, it's not. Pastor Roy, when he used to teach this with me in confirmation, would always talk about the fact that we're not animals, right? How many of you have dogs? Right? How many of you have little boy dogs that run around and try to hump everything? Right? You've all seen that, right? Little dogs. They don't care. They'll go up to somebody's leg. They'll go up to the tree. They'll go anything, right? Because it doesn't matter. It's just a matter of them having babies or just getting rid of an urge. It's not what happens with us. We are emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually tied to the things that we do with our body. And whoever tells you differently is lying to you. So be reverent to your body. Be reverent to other people's bodies and care for them. I know. 3, sex gets twisted. This gift that God gives us gets twisted into ways that it was never intended to be. We're going to talk about one aspect of that, which probably some of you have heard about. Luther says in the Small Catechism, lead pure and decent lives in word and deed. We're going to talk about pornography. I know, you're like, we're in church, Dad, you shouldn't talk about pornography. Does everybody know what pornography is? Right? Images or videos that you see of people having sex. It is all over the internet. Everyone in this room probably has access to some level of internet, right? Whether it's on your phone or your computer or that. Here are some statistics about pornography. Every second of the day, there are 28,258 people watching pornography at this moment. And at this moment. And at this moment. And when you're asleep tonight at 1 o'clock in the morning, there'll be 28,000 people watching pornography somewhere in the world. No, actually, sorry, this isn't the world. This is the stats for the United States. There is annually spent, every second there is $3,075.64 being spent by people. Every second. 3,000, 6,000, 9,000, 12,000, 18,000, 21,000, 24,000, 27,000, $30,000, boom, just like that. 370 people are typing the word adult into a search engine right now. In a day, there are 37 new pornographic videos created in the United States. 2.5 billion emails trying to get people to watch pornography are sent every day. 68 million searches related to pornography every day. 116,000 people wanting to see pornography related to children every day. This is twisted. This is wrong. This is not what God intended us to do with our bodies or to be in relationships with other people. 200,000 Americans are classified as addicts of pornography. 40 million Americans regularly visit porn sites. 35% of all internet downloads. How many of you have ever downloaded a movie or anything on the internet? Like a movie from like Netflix or something like that, or a file, or a game. You have a new DLC, right, for the game that you like to play. You download it, okay? Music video you download, new song off of Spotify or iTunes. That file you need for work or school. 35% of all downloads on the internet are related to pornography. 35% of the internet. It's not good. 34% of internet users have experienced unwanted pop-up related to pornography. How many of you have been there watching, like surfing through the internet, looking for something, and on the side there will be a little thing that pops up about pornography or something like that? Yep, it happens. It happens. It's unwanted and it happens. 1/3, and here's the thing, ladies, this is not just a guy because guys are gross kind of thing. 1/3 of all people who watch pornography are women. This is the way that our world gets corrupted. And you're like, okay, Chad, I'm not going to do that. I don't see the benefit of that. I don't see how it's good. I think it's gross. It's disgusting, and you're right. But there's another reason why I bring this up. As I was looking through my research, 60% of people who get divorced, at least one person in that relationship, regularly watch pornography. 60% of marriages, okay? You are 300 times more likely to get a divorce if you watch pornography over somebody who doesn't. 300 times. Because it's bad for a relationship. It's bad for a husband and wife to not be solely focused on each other, which is what God intended. And people will argue, oh, it's just pictures. It doesn't mean anything. I don't know these people. It gets into our brains. They've done studies and they found that kids who watch pornography, young people, young teenagers, have completely distorted views of how men and women should relate in relationships. They find that they develop unhealthy relationships of seeing either that men should be dominant over women, or women should be submissive to men, or that it should just be kind of like it's okay to cheat because it's just a video, but it creates this idea that relationships, it's okay not to be faithful, which is what God intended for us to do. This is all kind of weird, and I can see some of you are like even kind of cringing and stuff. But the reason I bring this up is because it's important for us to understand what God intends for you. He wants you to be happy. He wants you to be in a relationship. If you don't choose to be in a relationship, and I have friends who've never gotten married, and they're happy. They're happy with where they've been. They're happy where they might go. And that's great. But God intends us to be in relationships. That's why He gave us guys and girls. And I would encourage you as young people, date people, right? Go on dates. Have people that you go and hang out with. Why? Because you're going to learn what you like in people. Most of the relationships that I went through in my life, I began to learn these are the things I like about the opposite sex. This is what I want to see in a spouse. I met my wife my freshman year of college. Did not know her in high school. I dated the same girl throughout most of high school, on and off. My parents really thought we were going to get married. And then I met my wife, and we dated. And then we broke up. Why we broke up? That's up for debate. But we broke up. And I dated a number of people. And in that time, I began to realize that I really wanted to be with my wife. I really wanted to be with Jamie. Didn't really figure it in my head. I can tell you what happened. I went away for the summer to camp. I was gone all summer. I got back, and my mom told me, "Oh, Jamie called you." And I was like, "Oh, really? Why'd she call me?" Now, she called me for a really bad reason, because one of our friends had died. She wanted to let me know. But in that moment, I realized I really liked this woman. And in August, we got back to school, and we started dating. And come January, we were engaged. But that's because I spent time dating other people and realizing what was important to me. So date people, okay? It's okay to date. It's okay to date, but know where you are. Know where you are in terms of relationships and set boundaries for yourself. Try to look at it and say, what is healthy for me? What do I feel comfortable doing in my relationships? And that should be getting to know people, being friendly. Sex doesn't really need to do anything. If anything, most of the time it gets in the way and causes us to stumble and do that, because God didn't intend for it to be something that we casually enter into. He wants it to be part of a relationship centered around Him. And that's why we have church weddings. That's why they are so important, to gather together and say, hey, these two people want to be together for the rest of their life. They want to love each other. They want to share in it. They want to possibly raise a family together. And when you enter into that commitment, you have to look at it and say, you know what? There are going to be times when the other person is going to do things that I don't like. There may be times where sometimes you're in a relationship and somebody else is really, really nice to you. And you have to say, you know what? I appreciate that you're nice to me. I appreciate that you may want to have a more in-depth relationship with, but I have a spouse. I have somebody else that I care for deeply. And be faithful, because that's what God does. God's faithful to us, no matter what we do. And so He expects us to be faithful to the people in our life. God intends us to be in a loving, caring relationship. He intends for us to look at each other with respect, whoever that person is in your relationship. And He intends for us to care for and honor our bodies, which He has given us. God gave you your body to be a temple where God resides. And how you do that reflects how your relationship with God is going. We honor our bodies, we honor God. We allow our bodies to be used for shameful, degrading things. That's not what God intends. And that's why He gives us this commandment. It's not to be like sex is bad. There is no time in the Bible that God says sex is bad. Actually, God says sex is really, really good. It's really, really important. And that's why I want you to care for it. That is why He gives us this commandment. So I've talked enough about this. We're going to break up into two groups. One of the groups is going to go downstairs into the fellowship room. One of the groups is going to just stay, you want it out there or in here? So you're just going to stay in here and give you an opportunity to talk, to share, to ask questions, guys to guys, girls to girls. It's not, yes, talking about sex, yes, talking about relationships can be embarrassing. But here's the thing. It's something that God intended for us. And so if God intends us to be in something healthy and wonderful, we should embrace that. We should be okay talking about it because God says it's a good thing. So girls are going to stay up here with Kara and Alyssa and the other girls. And then I'm going to take, me and Lewis, you guys get to hang out with Lewis, are going to go downstairs to the fellowship room. So let's do that. And then go ahead and kill the live stream.